Sport by Paul Durcan. Before watching this video, make sure that you write down as much information as you can from memory on your poem, and then take your own independent notes before we begin. With that said, let's begin with the title, which is a simple sport. There's not much to say about this title, other than the fact that he is trying to impress his father in a sporting game. Based on the level of detail given within this story, we can assume it to be autobiographical. Like many of Durcan's poems, he does not adhere to a specific structure, and in this case he goes entirely free verse. 6 stanzas of varying length, sporadic use of meter, and no apparent rhyming scheme. He does however use repetition and internal rhyming to try and glue it together as a poem instead. Durcan immediately makes a pun upon the word fields, which could play as playing fields or fields of expertise. I feel this gives the poem an immediate comical, yet also cynical tone and sneering tone towards his father. From the get-go, we see it's a very negative relationship. You did not have many hopes for me. A little bit of context on Paul Durcan's life. He did play football or Gaelic football until he was around 12 years old, but then he left due to bullying and tension amongst the team. Based on this poem, we can probably tell that he didn't have much interest in playing, but his father pushed him to do so. And perhaps this day, this particular example now on his 21st birthday, was a chance for him to regain that hope, or that sense of confidence from his father. As always, Durcan shows that he's the master of enjambment, and he really takes the reader by surprise here. Reading this poem line by line, you would think so far that this is a very ordinary story of a son trying to impress his father in a sports game. In fact, we find out that he's playing for a mental hospital team against another mental hospital team, and this takes the reader by surprise as we delve into this bizarre situation that is the life of Paul Durcan. As a bit of context to his life, Durcan was submitted to a psychiatric hospital by force from his family after his first year at UCD in university. This choice was made by his father. Here Durcan uses very intentional use of epistrophe, which is the repetitive endings. So Grangegorman Mental Hospital and Mullingar Mental Hospital. This is to emphasize the bizarre nature of the situation. Durcan is not trying to hide the fact that this is incredibly obscure and strange, and his life is not normal. Again, this adds to that surreal and comic tone. But in another way, it also gives a very monotonous, dull feeling with this repetition. Grangegorman Mental Hospital team against Mullingar Mental Hospital team. Again, adding to that surreal nature of I'm a 21-year-old psychiatric patient trying to impress my father on a football field in the middle of Mullingar. What's happening to my life? This could be just my own interpretation, but I do feel there is, again, a certain cynical tone to this section here, through his use of assonance of the broad vowels of all the way down to the enjambment of 50 miles. It's potentially a sarcastic tone, because again, 50 miles is, less than an hour's drive. It's not that far. Again, emphasizing Mullingar potentially for this repetitive, monotonous kind of tone. I believe Durcan is very careful with his words. And by saying observe, you came down to the sidelines to observe me. Not to support, not to cheer, not to even watch. To observe is to analyze, to assess someone, and to judge them while you look at them. To Durcan, this is a test to see if he can live up to the hopes he had for him. Building further upon this, it's interesting to see the fact that Durcan's father was in fact a judge. It's quite a bitter irony that he constantly judged his son all his life. This being further emphasized by the fact that he was fearful he would let him down. Again, Durcan uses every opportunity to use the full mouthful of Mullingar Mental Hospital team, building upon this monotonous, repetitive tone. The next lines are vivid imagery that develop a great sense of characterization of the opposition team. Additionally, caesura is used to great effect here, and with gapped, red, oily, frizzy, brushy eyebrows, creates a fantastic impact of intimidation. This wall of muscle and masculinity are caricatures really, over-exaggerations of pure masculinity and manhood. Again, use of enjambment for comic effect. All 3 of them, I was informed, cases of schizophrenia. It all adds to the self-depreciating humour that he loves to employ, since he himself is a psychiatric patient. A very strange but interesting stanza begins with a rumour. Somewhat adds or criticises the hearsay of rural Ireland and the gossip that is spread. Interesting to note that the centre half forward was actually an alcoholic solicitor. There seems to be a pattern that anyone who works in the field of law or the judicial system tends to look like an antagonist within any of the stories within Durcan's poetry. So this could perhaps be a dig or an attack again, or on undermining his father's authority again. This alcoholic solicitor has a bar brawl known as a misunderstanding and castrates his best friend in the altercation. It's a euphemism here for a grotesquely violent act. To call removing the genitals of his best friend a simple misunderstanding is really twisting language and twisting your words to suit a certain narrative. It's quite shocking imagery, but at the same time it's so disarming and unexpected it comes across quite amusing in many ways too upon first reading. I believe that this very outlandish moment or story is a metaphor for Durcan actually feeling quite emasculated, as in being put down by someone else, or feeling that your role as a man has been removed by someone else. That's what it means to be emasculated. And he feels this on the Gaelic pitch, facing against this full forward of schizophrenics, and also these others such as the alcoholic solicitor. He feels intimidated by them. But not only that, he also feels intimidated and emasculated by the constant judgment of his father. But this alcoholic castrating barbarian had no memory of it, and he meant well, it was said. This use of caesura here highlights the general consensus of gossip from the others, that it was said. However, his poor, physically emasculated friend had to move to Nigeria. I'm uncertain if there is any symbolic connection to why he chose Nigeria, but we can certainly say that it's far off, exotic, and it's a faraway exile because of the sense of shame he feels as a victim. So to his surprise, he was able to save 3 or 4 goals, and he was able to get a certain goal and tip another certain goal for a point. All of this is very vague descriptions of events, and it makes me think that he's quite detached from the game. He doesn't actually care about the game itself as long as he does well in it. In a strange line, he states here that his father gave him this motivation. Knowing that his father was watching, he had that will to die, that essential need that a sportsman or an artist needs to perform. I think he's stating here that he is not naturally a sportsman. He is an artist. He's used to expressing himself, but he's doing his best to try and translate his skills and his enthusiasm into sport, just so he can impress his father. Again, repeating the full mouthfuls of Grangegorman Mental Hospital team versus Mullingar Mental Hospital team, again reminds us of the obscure nature and bizarre setting that it is in, but also the repetitive, monotonous element of it too. It's quite bittersweet that he remembers the score off by heart, and it shows that it really had a strong effect on him. It was a very momentous, emotional moment for Durcan. His father's simple response of "well played, son" means a lot to Durcan, or perhaps he's playing upon the fact that that's all he said to him. Also, the fact that he shook hands with him rather than hug him gives him a sense that it's a very masculine, formal and distant response. It's important to note that he achieved something at last. It's quite tragic that up to this point, on his 21 years on this earth, he had not done anything to impress his father. Again, repeating Grangegorman Mental Hospital team, and again adding to this tragic element that he was never to achieve such heights of praise from his father ever again. The best thing his father has ever said to him was, "well played, son." The only compliment he's ever received. And for comic effect, I think, he mentions that it's his 21st birthday on that day twice. It makes you wonder, if this is all his father said, then did he forget it was his son's birthday? Some messages of the poem, I think on a basic level, it's the frustration that all men feel when struggling to impress their fathers. He's criticizing and challenging common notions of masculinity. Is he as an artist less of a man than a sportsman? Is he less of a man than these tall, 6-foot, grizzly, gap-toothed savages that are on the opposite team? Is he less of a man for not doing exactly what his father says? It's a possible interpretation here, but he's potentially criticizing the exaggerated glorification of sport at this time in Ireland. At the end of the day, he's just kicking a ball around a pitch of grass. Why is that such an achievement in his father's eyes? Why can't he see that he's achieved so much more in all of his other artistic endeavours? However, I think most importantly, this poem is about a direct scrutiny of his own father. Interestingly, this poem was written not long after his father's death. Therefore, it's a highly critical apostrophe, something written to someone who cannot read it again. It's a sort of twisted eulogy or final send-off to his father. I think it's a sort of callous final thought that this was the closest thing he could grasp. He was trying to really try hard to find a happy memory of himself and his father, but that he had none except perhaps this, that he did once go 50 miles to go out to see him, to observe him play a game for a mental hospital team, a mental hospital that his own father had submitted him to by force, and that all he did was shake hands with him and say, "Well played, son." Seldom, if ever again, was he to rise to such heights in his eyes. Very, very cutting poem of this father.